Okay, so hello and welcome back to Grief Unedited. This is a place where we have real, honest, and sometimes quite raw conversations about grief and loss. For season two, this new season, we've shifted the focus slightly to invite along people who work in the field of death, loss, and grief. So we're sitting down with some of the industry experts who work directly in death and bereavement care. So from funeral directors, celebrants, service leaders, and people in the fields of grief research to try and give you a bit of a behind the scenes look at what we mean by the world of bereavement support, grief and loss. Now, with these episodes, I always encourage that you listen to your own wisdom. So, this subject matter can be difficult at times. Sometimes with grief, it can come upon us in unexpected ways. So, if there's anything in today's episode that feels in any way unhelpful for you, please feel free just to take a pause and jump back in whenever you feel ready to. If you do want to support the podcast, there's a variety of different ways that you can do that now. So, as before, you can always like and share an episode, help us to spread the word. Share it on your social media if you found an episode to be useful or helpful. Or now you can also use the Buy Us a Coffee link, which will be in the show notes for today's episode. Sadly, there is no coffee purchase with this, but as you know, this is a bit of a passion project for me, and any contributions or donations help to just contribute towards the processing and production of the show as well. So any donations are always very, very welcome. And today I am delighted to be joined with Nicola Reid, who is the Director of Client Services. I'm checking your title before we come on, Nicola, to make sure I got it right, and then I've murdered it already. Director of Client Services at Cruse Scotland Bereavement Support. And when I was setting up season two of Grief Unedited, Nicola was at the top of my hit list of professionals that I really wanted to have on the show because, as you'll get to hear in a moment, Nicola has got a really vast wealth of kind of experience in this sector. So I'm delighted to welcome you along today, Nicola. It's great to have you here.
And I'm equally delighted to be here. And when you mentioned podcast, that was top of my list of, yes, love to do that. Love to do that. So looking forward to the conversation, Karen.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Give us a bit of a picture of your background, because I know you've had many different hats in the world of bereavement support. So yeah, tell us a wee bit about how you got to the role that you are in now with Cruse Scotland.
Yeah, I guess professionally been in quite a journey. I've been with Cruse Scotland now for coming up for 6 years, and that role's changed in different ways over the last 6 years. But prior to that, I was a chartered accountant for 20 years. So working in a corporate field, corporate setting, lots of buying and selling businesses, all of that kind of thing. But alongside that, I had a supportive role, a trustee role with a pregnancy loss charity. So the concepts and the conversations around difficult parts of grief and loss and what that meant was always kind of there. And I think even in the corporate business world, grief and loss is never far away, especially if people are buying and selling businesses or passing it on to next generations and things like that. There was the people always mattered in that role as well. So although it seemed like a really bizarre shift of career.
Change.
Yeah,
Yep.
big change. And it was a big change in many ways, going from a corporate world into a third sector charity world. The themes of grief and loss were always there. So it felt a comfortable shift as well. And yeah, it has been that. It's been a place where it's odd to say it, but I enjoy the themes of grief and loss
Yep.
and really sitting with people in difficult and challenged and dark places sometimes and seeing change and seeing transformation. So that's where I've got to where I am in a job sense today and the variety that's in that of bits of training, bits of client support, bits lots of emails, all of that kind of stuff. There's a real variety in the role and I enjoy that as well. So yeah, that's how I'm here today.
I'm going to ask in a bit about some of the misconceptions about your role, but it strikes me that that's one of the ones I come up against quite often is that sense of like, I really, really enjoy my work. And I think often people are like, how? Like, how
Yeah.
can you enjoy it? How can you be that, enthusiastic about it? And it's like, I think, from my experience anyway, I think our industry is full of people that really love what they do and do it for that reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of my thoughts around one of the questions that I know we're kind of we'll touch on as we go forward is probably the one thing I hear most often when people say, "What do you do?" And you tell them I work for a bereavement charity. It's like that immediate silence or a, "Well, that must be really hard." And like, yes, but. So,
Yes,
yeah.
but yeah, yeah. And I suppose we should probably give a bit of a shout out to Cruse Scotland as well in
Yeah.
terms of, I'm conscious there'll be people who might be listening today who haven't heard of Cruse Scotland, don't know what they do. So do you want to give a bit of an overview of what they offer as an organisation, perhaps?
Yeah, so we provide bereavement support all across Scotland, and over the last few years, how we do that has changed really quite dramatically. So that support can be accessed in lots of different ways now, from our helpline through to one-to-one support that can be by telephone, online, or in person. Sometimes here and there in different geographies, we offer some group support setups, and in some parts of the country, we've got walks and talks, which are more social, just kind of allowing bits of social connection with people who understand and get it. So the range of supports is wide, and sometimes formal, sometimes informal, and hopefully moving towards a place where we're there for what people need at different points, at different times, at different at different parts of their journey and their interactions with grief. So yeah, it's out there in lots of different places, and our social media and things like that as well. We've got quite a lot of content building up on our social media that's helping people help themselves as well, because sometimes we're our own best agents for our own well-being. It was funny, I had an injury over the Christmas holidays, and in the hospital when I was in, there was a mirror and a little sign over it saying that the person most responsible for your health is looking at you, and you're looking at the mirror and seeing
Wow.
yourself, and it was like, oh,
Yeah.
it's quite challenging that sometimes
Mm.
we're our own agents for change, and other times we need people to be alongside us in the journey. And I think Cruse Scotland's got a balance of that, of sometimes helping you help yourself, but also being there to be alongside and be part of the travelling through some of the difficult stuff together.
Yeah, I love that idea. Yeah, that's quite powerful as well in a hospital setting to be able to be like face to face with that. Yeah,
Yeah, a bit challenging whenever you're lying in a bed and you think, I just want you to fix me, just tell me what to do.
fix
And it's
it.
like,
Yeah.
no, no, no. It's like, actually, you have to take some ownership and agency of that myself. It's like, darn,
So
darn.
let's dive into today's questions, because if you haven't listened to any of the other season 2 episodes, the premise of this season is a wee bit different. So season 1, it was very much people having a platform to tell their story of loss, and kind of that conversation took whatever shape it took. But for season 2, what we're doing is each guest is being posed the same 3 questions, and we're going to see where that kind of opens up and takes us to. So my first question that I want to kind of offer to you, Nicola, and see just where we go with it is, what was one like unexpected lesson that you've learned about grief from your professional experience that you wish more people had awareness of or knew about?
Yeah, this was quite a tricky question to contemplate, because I guess my journey with grief has been so long. It's kind of
Mm,
from those early days of being on the periphery of it to then kind of getting much more involved in a therapeutic way and an operational way. But I think for me, it's that grief is normal, natural, and healthy, and it pops up everywhere.
mm,
In the context of my work, it's often popping up because there's been a bereavement, there's been a death, but I see it. I see it in so many aspects of my life, in friendship, relationship dysfunctions, breakups, in changes of career, in changes of health. There's lots of
yeah,
places where grief is what spikes up, and I think because it's something that, as a nation, we're not great at talking about death, dying, and bereavement. We shy away, or we're a bit scared of grief. So I think we forget that it's normal, natural, and healthy, and it needs to be given some time and energy and focus. And we're not as healthy if we don't do that. So I think that's
yeah,
probably, it's something around that of, if we knew that it's normal and natural, we might not be so scared of it, or we might not be so fearful of the emotions that come with it, or the strangeness that comes with it
yeah.
sometimes as well, and the variety that sits out there. So something about that of normal, natural, and healthy.
I remember one of my mentors saying to me, there's often not anything wrong in grief. And it's one of those things that's just stuck in my brain, because I think, especially as a therapist, the vast majority of people come to us because they think something's wrong. They have something that requires fixing, sorting, changing. And I think with grief, it's one of the things that we work with that's fundamentally different, because we're not trying to fix anything, we're not trying to change anything. The reality is that the death of the loss has occurred, and the work that we do is about adapting to that and trying to make sense of it and figure out, how do we move forward from that point. And I think that's where, like, to me, it feels like quite a fundamentally different thing that we do in therapy when it comes to grief and loss, as opposed to anything else that people might come through our door with.
Yeah, and I think as I've gone on to train as a counsellor, that's probably the bit that I've sometimes said is almost, sometimes I feel like a bit of a fraud when it comes to offering bereavement support, because and I know that it's not, and I know that a lot of the learning that I've done and the learned practice of listening and being alongside and sitting, there's a skill to that, and that's what you do bring into the room as a therapist. But there's something about a lot of what we hear is that sitting alongside and being comfortable with, and not, not having to bring in something that triggers change or triggers growth. Yeah. Or it's like, actually, let's allow this to be sad. Let's allow this to be difficult. Let's allow this to be relief and okayness as well. And just being in that with somebody has been, is transformational. But it seems like sometimes I've learned all these skill sets for other things, yeah. And yes, they are vital and they are important, and I don't ever reduce that. But yeah, it's like, actually, it's very different work, really very different work.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned something else there, Nicola, that to me, I can't ever get my head around, that, grief and loss is such a huge part of everybody's human experience. And yet it blows my mind that it's not a mandatory part of our curriculums in schools. Like every time I deliver training, somewhere in the training, I have this same conversation about, like, we've got this wonderful sex ed program for our kids to learn about, consent and, how to look after their bodies and how to have healthy relationships. And it's like they might go through their entire life and choose not to have an intimate partner, choose never like to go on and engage in sex. And yet, they're going to encounter grief at some stage. There's going to be loss in their world, and we don't necessarily teach them about what that looks like and how to navigate it and the normalness of it, and it just, I cannot fathom how we've got to this stage that we're teaching algebra that they'll never use, but we're not telling them how to navigate loss. It's like,
I grew up learning Latin, so there you're like, you don't use that very often in your day-to-day world. And and I think there's so many wasted opportunities in that as well, Karen. It's like, when you look at children's literature and you look at even Disney movies and things like that, the number of loss narratives and bereavement narratives and relationship narratives that are in there, where actually it would be really easy alongside some of those storylines to actually let's look at what's happening in there, and let's look at the grief, and let's look at the loss, and let's have a conversation about it. And and if I had £1 for every time that I heard a client say something about that they've stopped talking to friends and family because they don't want to burden them, and it's like, why do these conversations feel burdensome? And I think it's because we've not learnt how to carry them in our day-to-day lives and our day-to-day narratives and conversations. And definitely a missed opportunity, I think, in education for the functional life.
I think we've also become a nation of, like, chronic fixers. Like, we don't cope well with just that thing that you said of, like, actually just being alongside somebody in their distress and not wanting to interfere in any way or trying to fix it for them, or, have you tried acupuncture, or go and have some Reiki? And it's like, sometimes people just need space to be allowed to be sad and not to have it interfered with in any sort of way, and I don't think we're very good at doing that.
Yeah, I like that word, interfered, and that's what it feels. It's like, actually, I don't need this to feel better or cheered up or chirp. I just need to know that it's okay, that this feels rubbish, and this is hard, and this is lonely, or this is, I wasn't expecting this, and it's horrible, and yeah.
I'll move us to a second question, because I'm interested to hear what your response to this might be. But what's the single biggest misconception about your role, or perhaps the sector that you're in, and what would you change to help people kind of better understand that?
We've probably touched on my answer to that already. I think even just from the intros in our conversation already, I think it is that this must be hard, or my job must be hard or difficult. And yes, there, some people's experience of death and loss has been so hard and so complicated, and particularly if it's a very difficult death, or that there's complexities around the death or the relationships. Yes, there are some stories that are just unbelievably hard and difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But there are so many that are so, I don't want to use the word normal because that seems to diminish what, so routine, regular, expected. That the part of life. Actually, it's that circle of life, isn't it? That
Yeah.
they're part of the experience of being human and being alongside other humans. That death will happen, bereavement will happen, and actually, what I hear in the counselling room, what I hear in the conversations that I have with people, that there's actually so much lovely stuff in the conversations that we end up having, because often it's about those shared memories, those shared experiences, that the depth of relationships that people have had that mattered to them, and it's often banning. It can feel like a privilege to hear that, and yes, it is a privilege, but I would go beyond that and say sometimes it's a delight to be able to hear those stories that are often unspoken to other people or not being shared with friends and family because of that sense of burdening, and we get to hear them. And I've heard great, like beautiful, great, exciting, interesting stories in the counselling room, and I thought if people knew the wealth of what they get to hear, oh my goodness, they wouldn't feel burdened by the sadness that, yes, comes alongside that, and the bereft-ness that sometimes comes alongside that, because actually the aliveness of the story. And I'm distracted because I'm remembering a client at the end of our sessions together once said to me, "Oh, would you like to see a photograph of the person that they had been speaking about for the 6 weeks that we'd worked together?" And I was like, "Oh," and actually a client's had never asked me that before, and I was like, "Actually, yes, I would." And she showed me a picture of this person, and I was like, "Wow, they look exactly like how I expected them to look from how they had shared about their life and their experiences and their relationships together." And it was like, how lovely is that what I'm seeing visually then matches up with that 6 weeks of telling me about them. It was lovely, really lovely.
And as you say, I think that's something that, again, people probably don't realise about the work that we do, is that, often we don't see photos of the person who's died. Often we don't have any sense of like them other than what we get to hear from our clients as well. And I'm equally the same as you there, in that whenever clients maybe offer to, do you want to see this person, or bring in a memento or something, I'm always delighted, because I think I'm quite a visual person at the best of times. So I think when I have a somebody in mind, it makes things feel so much more tangible, I think, rather than often when we're working with people, it's quite abstract terms that we're talking in. So I definitely think there's something really powerful in that.
Yeah, and there's something in that visual, isn't there? I'm thinking, I had a client once come in wearing something that they'd been given by the person and that had died, and actually that item of clothing came week by week, and it was, and you could almost see how they interacted with the item of clothing differently as the weeks went on, or how the storytelling changed, and that was lovely. And I'm thinking another client that kind of did a little bit of artwork every day, and because it was remote work that we were doing, I could see that, and I could see it growing and how it looked different, and these visual stories that we can tell each other, and just keeping those memories alive, and keeping the person in our conversations and their name and all of that. So it's that I think that's the preciousness and the pricelessness of the work that we do whenever we get to have those conversations. And even in that happens, I think, even in our training sessions sometimes that I'm delivering, of people come and they share little glimpses of of stuff that's ignited for them as we've had a training session or a teaching session around grief, because we've all experienced something, even if it's not been a death. We've experienced something of grief and loss in just living. So yeah, that's the real, I think that's the gold of those richness of the people and the conversations and the images, and it's great.
You've taken us nicely to that idea of continuing bonds as well, and I kind of suppose want to just touch on that, because I think it's one of those things that if you're not in this sector, if you're not immersed in grief of your own, then it's maybe something you've not come across. But I think now more and more often we're recognising, and research certainly seems to be supporting the idea, that a big part of our grief journey is that idea of continuing our bonds with the person who's died. And I think, gosh, counselling is certainly a space that gives permission to do that. Whereas I know often, certainly when I'm working with clients, they get to a point where it feels difficult or awkward to, introduce the deceased person's name, or, they're saying things like, can I still bring it up? Is it all right if I talk about them? Whereas, in our space, when that door is closed and the room is open to the client, then it's like, gosh, we've got that whole hour that we can talk and remember and reminisce about, experiences they've had together or memories that are around. And I think that is such a precious part of kind of what grief ultimately looks like in real life, I suppose.
Yeah, it's funny that you introduced that concept of continuing bonds, and we have touched on it. But when I was choosing my mug for my cup of coffee to bring to this, I've chosen a mug that my sister sent me that's got little robins on it, because that,
Robins.
yeah. And so my association with robins is that my dad used to have this little robin that came to our garden every year, and we always knew it was the wee same robin because it had a wee gammy arm. And I'm conscious that if I'm
Oh,
telling you about a wee gammy, well, it didn't have a gammy arm; it had a gammy wing. I've got a gammy arm just now, in that sense of, actually, I can remember Dad when I have a cup of coffee, and I can think fondly of him. And this January's the month that he died, and I can have really lovely memories of this little robin with a gammy arm, and here, or gammy wing, and here I am with a gammy arm, and not able to tell him about that and all of that. But it's nice, fond memories that there probably was a time where, 10 years ago, it would have been really difficult to have seen a wee robin with a gammy wing, and all of that. But
yeah.
it shifts and it changes, and that those bonds remain, though.
Mm. And I think that's the beauty of grief, isn't it? It's not this solid static thing that we live with for the rest of our days. It's like it changes and it morphs, and there's sometimes where it feels really overwhelming, then there's other days where it feels much more manageable. And I think that's the one thing I quite like about working with it, is the kind of fluidity of it. Is like, certainly when I see clients week to week, sometimes fortnight to fortnight, it's their experience in those moments can feel really different, session on session. And yeah, I think that really speaks to that sense of just how fluid it can be at times.
Yeah,
Mm.
fluid and change and different even within a day. Do you know? You
Yeah,
think of a client coming for their one session with us, and how they prepare for that, and having that hour, and then how they step away, and how they might feel then at 6 o'clock in the evening having done that,
yeah.
and very different from the anticipation of it, or the experience of it, and what it equips for tomorrow and the next day. And yeah.
Mm. Okay, my third and final question, if it's all right. Um, can you give us a moment or an experience that has really affirmed your commitment to your role? Has there been any, yeah, clients, experiences, families that you've supported that's made you just go, yeah, I'm in the right place?
Yeah, again, this was you set very tricky questions, Karen. I think for me, that has been in some of the ongoing, very everyday things, because we live in this world. We do it day in, day out. We probably breathe, sleep, eat something to do with bereavement and loss, and we we deliver training on it, and we know it kind of inside out, but we forget that actually sometimes when we're sharing our experience, or sharing our learning and our knowledge, or being alongside it, this is new information to other people sometimes. And it's
Mm,
that kind of,
yeah.
oh, I didn't know that was grief, or oh, I
Mm,
didn't know that that was normal, and I didn't know that that was acceptable, or I didn't want to say that out loud because that seemed like the wrong answer. Or so it's in those kind of little, ah, okay. Oh, I'm normal. It's okay to feel like that. It's been in those that affirms, I think, that what I'm doing is helpful and useful, and not just in the lives of those that I encounter in work, but in my day-to-day relationships as well, with family and friends, of journeying alongside different losses and grief. And and you don't get away from it. You become a bit of a magnet, I think, for you. You see grief kind of pop up, and it's like, I know how
yeah.
to be, I know how to be helpful in this and alongside, and bring that reach. So it's, yeah, those little aha moments. But the other thing that probably, and we've almost touched on it, is the longevity of
Mm,
grief. And when I was thinking about this in preparation for this conversation, I had a client that I worked with years ago within a Cruse Scotland setting, where we had 5 sessions together, and then that person has gone on to become a longer term client of mine in private practice, with a big gap kind of in between. And the focus that we had in those 5 sessions together comes up every so often in the ongoing, very non-grief related work that we're doing much further down the line. And because we had that intensity of focus there, it's very natural to be able to reference back to that and be curious about where is that relationship in these now continuing bonds, ongoing life changes that have come down the line. So I think there's something about that, as well as the aha moments, the longevity that grief kind of can have, that reassures me that what we do in these early days and in that concentrated, yes, let's spend 5 or 6 weeks looking at your loss and your grief, that actually benefits your well-being decades down the line or years down the line. If we give it good focus and we give it, and 5 or 6, people say to us within Cruse Scotland, how can 6 weeks, what difference will 6 weeks make? And actually, because we're so focused on let's look at this grief, let's look at this loss for 6 weeks, you would never get that in longer term therapy where you come with perhaps a very different presenting issue where grief might pop up occasionally, but to give it good focus, good airtime, and then to see the value and the benefit of that years down the line is a really valuable thing. So yeah, the aha instant moments, but also the let's widen the lens and look at this over a period of time, that doing something well here really helps well-being down the line.
I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it, and thank you for sharing that, because I think I struggle at times with that idea of like short-term work when it comes to grief, and I know it's a necessary evil. I think in the world of counselling and psychotherapy, it's rare that people get access to ongoing and open-ended work, and I do find that tension between we can do 5, 6, 7 sessions of therapy for something that's going to be a lifelong process, and it's something I often talk about in supervision and try and make sense of it. But I think the way you've just framed that there, Nicola, makes sense in my brain of like we've got this real intense burst of just the grief with a view to whatever the person goes on to do in the rest of their life. That's going to be the foundation. It's going to come with the kind of standing that you've been able to do in the work of kind of supporting them with their grief, making sense of the grief, giving them the tools to look after themselves in their grief. I think the way I've always looked at it is that, grief is so intertwined with everything in our life. When you're in the trenches of grief, it touches everything in your world. There's not much that you can do that doesn't have a tinge of grief that comes hand in hand with it. And I think sometimes I've struggled to think about like how can we separate those things out enough to make 6 sessions really helpful for somebody.
Really helpful.
Yeah.
You reminded me a little bit of a couple of years ago through Cruse Scotland, we partnered with the University of Edinburgh around a project called My Grief, My Way, which is a website, a self-directed website to help people work through grief, look at grief, explore grief. And part of the training that we did in that, there was, you just take a little thread away from a piece of training, and it's just kind of one line that you take away. And that the trainer that was working with us had talked about, and I don't know if he was commenting on somebody else's quote and he was just repeating it, or whether this was his kind of observation. Can't quite remember. I need to go back in my notes. But that actually our work is a little bit like the work of a gardener, that for those 6 sessions that we're there to do that bit of gardening for that period of time. And that's not to say that the garden is then complete and does not need any other maintenance, but we'll revisit the garden, and there might be other seasons and times that we have to come back and rework that bit or do other stuff in the garden. And that really stuck with me of actually for this moment in time, we're tending to this. And there's lots of other stuff in the garden. There's lots of other maintenance needs. There's lots of other planting needs. But for this moment in time, this is our remit, that we're looking at that. And we might come back. We might never come back to it. We might do other bits in the garden. So that really struck me of 6 sessions is, and in the terms of grief, 6 sessions is never going to be anything because it's lifelong. Here I am talking about my dad who died 12 years ago. It's like it's a lifelong thing.
Yeah.
but it changes and shifts and morphs, and what we need for periods of time can be really effective even in a short term. I think even sometimes in an individual session you can get something that just shifts something fundamentally in one session. Like, oh, I get that, or I understand that about myself, or I understand why I'm feeling like that. Transformational. And another client I'm thinking of, there was like one line at the end of a third session, and that this was separate from Cruse Scotland and not bereavement work, but there was one line.
Yep.
And that was all they needed. And it was like, gosh, it's like, gosh. So these moments can change, just as harmful things can come into our lives in an instant. Moments of change and growth can come in an instant as well. So, yeah. 6 sessions can feel luxurious if we're thinking of a moment in a line, can't they?
Single session work, absolutely. And thank you for that wee nugget of gold there, because I feel like that's really going to stay with me, certainly. And I can imagine it's going to be in my supervision sessions on the not too distant future as well, because I think there is that constant balancing act of, being able to give people the space that they need, but equally constraints of organisations where it's going to be time limited in some way, shape, or form. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you for this conversation today, Nicola. I knew it was going to be rich anyway, but it's been lovely to kind of hear not just the breadth of your experience, but some of those kind of moments along the way that have really stood out for you. And I loved what you said about, like, actually sometimes it's in the everyday stuff that just reaffirms your commitment to what you do and, the people that you serve. Because I think sometimes we can look for the big things or those really, like, magnificent moments that you get once in a blue moon. And it's like, no, actually for you, it's the day-to-day of those little things, those little light bulb moments that appear for your clients. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd want to share? Any parting thoughts before we say goodbye?
No, I don't think so. Thank you for interesting and provocative questions. I always love a good question. So thank you for 3 of those. That got my New Year mind ignited. So thank you for those, Karen.
Beautiful, beautiful. And what we'll do at the bottom of today's show notes as well, we'll put all the links to Cruse Scotland, so that if anybody's listening along today and wants to check out the website, because there is stacks of really useful information on there. And as Nicola mentioned as well, there's a lot of really useful training courses that are delivered by Cruse Scotland and by yours truly as well. So if you decide on one of the Cruse training courses, you might get the delight of myself or Nicola delivering that to you.
We should do one together. We should develop a course that we deliver together, Karen.
Double trouble. I don't know if we'd ever get that out the starting blocks.
Yeah. And I guess just encouraging people that don't journey it by yourself, because it's a lonely road. No. And it's an easier journey when we do it in the company of other humans who get it. So,
yeah, 100%. So thank you, as I say, for today's conversation. I always want to just acknowledge at the end of the podcast for each episode as well that if you found this helpful, or if there's somebody in mind that you're thinking might benefit from today's conversation, please do share it with them, send it along. All the links are obviously on social media that you can share it. For us as a platform, it's the best way of people getting to know about our episodes and hearing about the work of Grief Unedited. So yeah, any likes, shares, interactions are always greatly received. And lastly, if you do want to connect with me, you can find me on Facebook and Instagram, and both of those are at Continuum Counselling, or my website is www.continuumcounselling.com. So that's all for today. As I say, we'll get more info into the show notes for you if there's anything you want to follow up on. But until next time, this has been Grief Unedited.